II. I call you Knoxville's collector of Black history and the stories in Appalachia. For those that don't know you, you're most known for Black in Appalachia, which is a fascinating group right here in town. So first, just tell me a little bit about yourself. You're an East Tennessee native.
Yeah. I'm born and raised in Hamilton County, Tennessee, in the Nolichucky River watershed. This is Voices of the Valley, so I'm from the Nolichucky River Valley, and my folks have been in that area for a very long time, even before the Civil War. So I grew up out in the country, ripping and running in the woods, and that's where I'm back at today.
Really? So how did you get into genealogy and researching your people, as we say? Who are your people?
Who are my people? I got into it, I think it became apparent for me when, you have to do like the 8th grade family tree. And it became apparent to me that my mom's side of the family, there was no shortage of information and tales to be told about the lore of the family. My mom's family's from East Tennessee, from Hamilton County, but also from the coal fields of Southwest Virginia, Appalachia, Virginia, to be exact. And but my dad's family were largely farming families, sharecroppers and enslaved people, and there wasn't much to pull from. I knew my grandparents, and I knew my cousins, and I knew my aunts and uncles, and I could touch them and talk to them, but beyond that, we really didn't have anything. And so that was kind of the impetus for me as a young person to start collecting photographs out of boxes and putting them together. It was some kind of compulsion. Like I had a compulsion as a young person to gather these things and organize them and put it together to try to understand like how did we get into that landscape that we were.
Did it start with asking questions, or did you dive right into, I'm going to go look at the county records? How did you even, because it takes work to look up your family lineage.
Yeah. I started asking questions, but a lot of times people just didn't know. And so one of the things that I would do would go to the Hamilton County library, or I would go to other small libraries to try to find that stuff. And this was before the internet. So I'm going and looking through physical card catalogs and looking through books. And one of the things I realized early on is that even in those repositories, there wasn't much. You may have a whole bookshelf about a county's history, and there may be on that whole bookshelf, there may be 2 or 3 paragraphs about the Black community in that county. And so I learned to look between the lines, and you have to trace back and look for the white people, the white male landowners, to try to find mention of your folks. And so I learned that early on before the internet and got good at it. And so, yeah, it was also a learning lesson, like, okay, my folks don't know much. These record keepers, these holders of the history don't have us in there. So then what do you do?
What do you do? How do you, because I love genealogy, and we've spoken before. In fact, that's how we ended up connecting one time, because I found an old photo that my great uncle gave me. And like you got to read between the lines and try to figure it out. Did you get frustrated, or did that kind of give you some drive to go harder? And
the drive, the frustration is ongoing and never ending, right? But I think the drive comes from finding these little pieces, because you will find pieces. And I often wonder if my ancestors just kind of like giving me little crumbs here and there, like following the crumb trail. And so I would find enough to keep me motivated to find more. And it's an ongoing process over years. Like it took for my Isom, my great-great-grandfather, Kelson Isom, who was enslaved in Gate City, Virginia, Scott County, Virginia, near Kingsport. It took me 20 years to find the moment that he came out of enslavement and where he was enslaved at. And so that's 20 years of looking and finding. You're not going to find anything, and so you put it down, and then you go work on something else, and then you come back, and then you find something else. So. And incidentally, I found him doing research for Black in Appalachia. We were researching a slave cemetery in Lee County, Virginia, outside of Jonesville, and I was looking through records and found him listed in an estate, inventory of an estate. He was valued for $1,200, and yeah, so I found him in there, and
$1,200.
$1,200.
for a whole soul, for a person.
A whole human,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel when you do this research and when you do put those little connections together, is there a sense of almost like connection to your past? It's not so vague. It's almost like this little feeling of wholeness. Every little piece completes the circle.
Yeah, and I think my place in right now and my life in this geography also feeds into that. It's like I can feel and touch and see these places that are in the census records and are in these wills and in these land deeds. I'm in the landscape and I'm of the landscape. And so in some ways, the history doesn't feel like history to me. It's something that's alive and moving and thriving today for me.
So how do we get to Black in Appalachia? How was that formed?
Yeah, so I was working at East Tennessee PBS, editing and doing community outreach and film screenings and things like that, and writing grants. And me and Christopher Smith, who's the head of production development at East Tennessee PBS, we were approached by my cousin, Stella Gudger, in Rogersville, Tennessee. She helped put together Swift Memorial Museum and Price Public Community Center. It's a it's a 2-room black schoolhouse that she renovated over
which is wonderful.
Several decades. In Rogersville, she approached me and Chris and said she got a little money. She wants to produce a short documentary about the late HBCU that was in Rogersville, Tennessee, Swift Memorial Institute. And I had did some oral histories previous to that, and Chris was like, okay, we got, PBS is a nonprofit, so if we can find the funding, we can do it. And so me and Chris and others on the team put together this short documentary aimed for 8th graders. So that when 8th graders come to the museum, they can learn about the school that used to be there in Rogersville. And the response that we got from the production of that from community members was really profound. People were very excited, and and the sense that I got was like these people knew this story and have held this story, and finally somebody is validating that this story was a real. They're not crazy. This actually happened. There was an HBCU that was developed and ran and produced many great educators that then went out into the region and taught kids in 1-room schoolhouses all across the South. And Chris said, we should keep doing this. And I was like, okay. And so I just kept going, Chris kept going, and we just kept producing as many short, locally specific documentaries as possible. Because these were stories that I knew of that were just waiting to be told from my own family and others around me. So
I love the title, Black in Appalachia. I love that it doesn't beat around the bush. It's not like urban Appalachia. You know what I mean? Sometimes we kind of, but I think a lot of times when you think of Appalachia, I grew up in Miami, and so when I think of Appalachia, or when I thought of Appalachia, I did not include us in that thought, even though clearly I have family that grew up in rural Alabama, and that's still there today. Do you think the name instills a sense of pride and connection for Blacks right here in the East Tennessee area?
Dr. William Turner co-authored the book Blacks in Appalachia.
And that's where the name came from.
That's where the name came from. So it was a nod to his work, earlier work, we're standing on this person's shoulders. And, people in Knoxville don't necessarily consider themselves Appalachian. And I think people in Birmingham don't necessarily consider themselves Appalachian. And people in Pittsburgh don't necessarily consider themselves Appalachian. You have a stereotype. You have a view of what an Appalachian is. It's very rural. It's very white. It's very all kinds of other things that I won't say.
A little more mountain, a little less streetlights.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a stereotype that we have, and so it was very purposeful to build on the work of others that came before us, and root us in a place and create something that would help hopefully instill in the generation after me or younger than me that this is my place too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What has been the response from the non-Black community with these efforts over the years?
Yeah, the non-Black community are very supportive because also they don't know. And they're excited to learn about this history in their own communities that they don't know about. Oftentimes, I'll go into a community or a county with what's perceived to have very little Black history. And we get to going to work and doing research and talking to people, and people in those historical societies and in those repositories, they don't know. And so they're excited to learn and hear about Black history in their own communities that they didn't know about. And so the response from white folks has been great as well, because I think we all want to know these things, and we've just not had the labor dedicated to produce it.
So what do? You all go out into different communities, right? Because you all have hosted some gatherings for families to come and almost present their people to you all.
Yeah, and in doing the short documentaries, one of the things that became really apparent was that there's a greater need than just producing these locally specific documentaries. There's older, oftentimes women, who have a Rubbermaid container in their basement full of everybody's business in the community, and for years and years they've been clipping graduation things, they've been holding on to
Obituaries for 30, 40 years.
and that stuff is part of our narrative, and that stuff is and so seeing those materials, and that oftentimes those older people will say, well, when I'm gone, my kids are going to throw this away. They're not going to keep this. And so how do we raise those personal collections up to researchable materials and genealogical resources? And so we've hosted community history days where we go in Knox County. I think the last one we did was in the Oakland community and outside Fountain City. There's several rural Black communities in Knox County that don't have very rich documented history compiled.
Okay.
The history's there.
It's just scattered in the community.
It's just scattered.
Yeah.
For instance, there's the Sunrise community where my people settled after emancipation in East Knox County. There's the Oakland community in Fountain City. There's High Top community in East Knox County where Commissioner Dacia Lundy's family's from. There's Concord community and Farragut community had a sizable Black community out there. And so we don't hear about these rural Black communities, these small enclaves that existed. And so we did a community history day we thought that the pandemic was subsiding, and so it was that fake lull that we had.
Yes, I remember.
And so we partnered with Pat Harris, who's the historian for Foster Chapel Church here in Knoxville, very historical Black church in town. And we went to the old Foster Chapel in the Oakland community and did oral histories, and community members brought their materials in, their photographs, and we digitized them, give them digital copies on a thumb drive. We don't keep materials, we just maybe provide advice about, okay, you might want to store this in this kind of folder. You might want to take the staples out of this. You might want to, store this in this kind of conditions. And then we take that stuff, clean it up after it's digitized, and put it up on our community history database, which is free and open to the public for people to research. We also do, for the past 3 or 4 years, we've did census data collection, where one of the things that I wished existed when I was doing my research is a bridge between national emancipation, say 1870 in the census, and chattel enslavement, 1860. And so there's a bridge there that Black families have a tough time crossing, which is from when you're listed as nameless pieces of property to full families with names and ages and sexes and occupations. And so what we do is we go into a county, and all this is digital now, so we go into a county and pull out the free people of color. We basically create a Black census for 1860 and 1870. The free people of color, 1860, slaveholders, 1860, and enslaved people, and then the full Black population, 1870, for those counties, and we put them in spreadsheets so that they can be searched by name. And so that's one of the things that we've did over the years.
Have you ever had anybody where you help them make those connections and they're just in awe, like, or they just are overwhelmed?
Oh man, that's a lot. Let me think. I mean, yes, and I can't recall anybody specifically because it's something that continues to happen, right? Like we don't always know what the outcome is from what we've produced. We put this stuff out in the world, people have access to it, and then sometimes people will comment on Facebook and say, oh, that's my great-great-grandma, da-da-da-da-da. We didn't know this about her or whatever. And so that's, the reaction from the community is what you want. You want people to say, to encourage you to let you know that you're doing the right thing, right? So,
does it feel like, everybody wants to be seen, whatever that looks like for you individually, you want to be seen. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like a lot of the communities you're going into is kind of that feeling of acknowledgement and we're part of this fabric of society as well? Yeah,
we were doing oral histories for, in East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, we celebrate the 8th of August as Emancipation Day, and Juneteenth as well, but we were doing...
Celebrate all the days, honestly.
Yeah, all the days.
Yeah. It's all needed.
I was doing interviews of community members in Newport, Tennessee, and I was interviewing a woman in the church, in the AME Zion Church in Newport, about their 8th of August celebrations. They call it the Tennessee Picnic. It happens every other year. And I think it happens this year. And she said, I was like, you're wrapping up an interview and you say, is there anything else you want to make sure people know about you and your family or your community? And she just said that we're here.
That we're here.
Yeah.
Where do you see this project going? Like if wishes came true, dreams came true, what would you like to see Black in Appalachia grow or become?
Yeah, I think one of the things nonprofits can kind of fall into is this idea of exponential growth. Like we always have to be growing. And I think that being a nonprofit, not being a for-profit entity, I think that we don't have to always be growing. I think that we can settle in and dig into where we're at with the immense and never-ending amount of work that we have now. Right now, what we're looking at is, I've been doing this for now 11 years as the director of Black in Appalachia. I'm looking at handing the reins over to somebody else,
really?
Some women, because women rule the world. And
you're a smart man. I knew you were a smart man.
Yeah, and so as the guy, one of the co-founders, the dude that's founded this organization, helped found this organization. I think it's really important to recognize that I should not be in this position permanently, that we need to create space for younger people to drive the boat and do weird things that we never would have thought of. And so, over the next 2 years, I hope that happens, that leadership gets handed off to a younger female group of people. And but for me personally, my tasks in this work, we're continuing to produce short documentaries about lynchings that have occurred in the region. That community members can use and have used to create community remembrance projects to memorialize atrocities that have happened in their community, such as Bristol, Virginia is working on one right now. And so continuing to provide support for smaller organizations or smaller cultural entities, Black entities in the region, however that looks, if it's fixing the window in the church or if it's doing research or digitizing materials for small organizations or helping them tell their story. We're also we have an agreement now with the National Resource Conservation Service of the USDA to help make sure that Black farmers and Black landowners in the region have access to resources, so that they can stay on their land and maintain their land. So there's that work. And so it looks a lot like identifying the need as we're doing this work and then figuring out how we provide labor to support filling that need. We also have a paid-for building. We just paid off our building.
Really?
Our field office.
Okay.
In Whitesburg, Tennessee,
Okay.
in rural Hamlin County, where I'm from. And we have a info shop and a bookstore, new and used bookstore that focuses on Black and Appalachian and Southern literature and books. And we have a research room, we have reference books. And so, as the old man, maybe going into the future.
You're killing me with this because I don't see you as being old.
I'm
okay.
You can't just show up. You can't just show up at 60 and be like, I'm an old man. You got to start working on it. You got to start practicing. And so I'm working on my old man skills. We got a fish fry coming up this weekend. And so I'm doing my fish fries. I'm going to work on the bookstore. I'm going to build out our research room. And so, it's all about, I think, slowing down and doing the work and being methodical about it and being mindful of our labor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the most recognized entities with Black in Appalachia is the podcast. You got to talk about the podcast.
That's right. Yeah, you do. So this is, the podcast is getting ready to go into its, I think, third season with Dr. Nkechi Alameen and Angela Dennis, who are brilliant people. The podcast came out of East Tennessee PBS when we were still working there, when I was still working there. And Chris Smith saw the opportunity with the Public Radio Exchange, PRX, to do a podcast training. And he said, well, we ought to do this Black in Appalachia podcast since this has so much traction and this is the work that we're doing. And I was like, I will write the proposal, but I do not have time or space to do a podcast.
Because it's a commitment. You've got to be on, and it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And so you think that, in video production, you've got video and audio to worry about, and editing. And you think, well, a podcast is easier, just editing audio, but that's not the case. It's a very labor-intensive process. And so I had been familiar with the work of Dr. Nkechi Alameen, who works on urban Black Knoxville, urban removal, and things like that.
I've interviewed her before about that. She's phenomenal.
Hey, she's phenomenal. And I talked to her about it, and she was excited, and Angela Dennis was excited. And so they took off. And really, the podcast has become this thing with all the work that has been produced at East Tennessee PBS, the oral histories and the short documentaries. The podcast is able to take from kind of the historical research and narratives that we've collected and oral histories and pull that stuff out and hold it up and look at it in a modern context. And so it's become very popular, more popular than anything that Black in Appalachia has ever done. And East Tennessee PBS has continued to produce those episodes. Educators use it in the classroom regularly, and so we can, you can look at a map and see who's downloading the podcast, and it's often clustered around universities, and so we know that university professors and high school educators are using the podcast.
You're probably reaching people that never would have looked into this information before, right?
Yeah, there's people in Kansas that are downloading it, in LA, and so, yeah.
So the podcast, Black in Appalachia, was kind of like a gateway to some partnerships, the Smithsonian, for example.
Yeah. Just recently, East Tennessee PBS and the Green McAdoo Center, and Black in Appalachia, the podcast, partnered to develop and produce several live recorded podcasts at Green McAdoo. And those podcasts were called Voices and Votes, and that will be on the new season of the Black in Appalachia podcast coming up in Juneteenth of this year. And it was really about those podcasts with the Smithsonian were all about civic engagement, access to voting. And so there were state officials, local officials, providing just information about how to engage civically and how to participate fully in this democracy.
My goodness. Did you ever see that coming when you all started this all out,
No. I mean, I'm a bit of an introvert, so I'm delighted to sit in a dark room and go through census records or edit. And I never imagined that I'd be sitting here talking to you, and never imagined that, people would really care that much. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite story throughout this journey with Black in Appalachia?
Mm-hmm. There is. Do you have a favorite child? No.
Oh, they're all special.
Yeah, they're all special.
All special.
Well, I'd have, more recently, we've been working in Western North Carolina. over the past since January, and just learning about the Black communities and history over in Western North Carolina. And recently, there was a story that I came across, Miss Della Jackson in Macon County, Miss Della Jackson in Polk County, North Carolina, and this woman in the 1930s and 40s and 50s created and maintained Black libraries for students all across the county in conjunction with the small one-room Black schoolhouses during segregation. And she built what I've seen is this amazing educational infrastructure for Black students that didn't exist and would no longer be, normally not be available. This is the same area where Nina Simone's from, right? Nina Simone's house is there in Triune. And so Miss Della Jackson is the most recent, one of the more recent stories that I've come across that this amazing woman built this educational infrastructure from scratch because she saw the need and wanted to make sure that Black children had access to library books. And she built a community center. She built a little conference center in this small rural community in Polk County, North Carolina. And it's those types of stories, I think, and there's no shortage of them, that really get me excited. The stories of these, oftentimes in Black history, we get really kind of obsessed with the firsts and these greats, these great people. Yes,
the Martin Luther Kings, the Rosa Parks, all the big names.
Yeah, and locally so one of the things that the framework of what we do is really to focus on the average everyday person as super important to the development and understanding of Black history in the region, right? These school teachers, these laborers, the coal miners, the preachers, these people were the ones that actually did the labor day to day to maintain and keep the Black community functioning and safe in a lot of times. And so for me, the stories of these working class, average everyday people are just as great and important to the Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King stories. I think that without their stories, we can't have a full understanding of Black history in the region.
You're just a breath of fresh air. This is my wheelhouse. I was very excited to talk to you, and this gave me everything I needed to feel good when we walk away. I hope it inspires more people to start asking questions before elders are gone, to say, tell me about your childhood, and write down the names you know. And then we're all going to turn it over to Black and Appalachia so they have our records for safekeeping.
Yeah, there's no shortage. Like, there's really, you can look in every nook and cranny in this region. Appalachia comprises of 13 states and 420 counties. Like, in every corner we look in, there's Black history. Every nook and cranny where you think that there would never be any Black people, we've been there.
Why do you love East Tennessee? I'm going to end it with that. Why do you love East Tennessee?
It's from. Like, I was driving here today. I was like, I know this place. It's in my blood. I saw that they were cutting the hay. Like, they're cutting and baling hay right now. It's that season. The hummingbirds are back. It's warm enough to go get in the river a little bit and float around.
You are a country boy. I love this.
It's squirrel season. So.
William Isom II, you are an absolute pleasure. Thank you for telling me your story.
Thanks for having me.